Good morning.
Good morning.
I've been asked, I won't say by whom, to introduce Esther Figueroa, the youngest of my three sisters, who we have already heard is a filmmaker, linguist, and now the novelist of the moment. I'm going to tell you a few stories about her and her family, mainly her parents, which will help you to better understand why she would write a book like Limbo, and why she stands out, and why she's willing to take a stand against the destruction of the environment, and why she's been able to do it in such a special manner, embodied in Limbo. I start with her full name, Esther Miriam Angela. She was named after her favorite, paternal, our favorite I should say, indeed to us angelic parental aunt, the very gentle and caring Mary Angela Mercedes. To most Jamaicans, they would say she's very unfortunate not to have gotten the Mercedes. But that is her choice. As to Mary, this was too simple for her father, who was himself, in the Hispanic Roman Catholic tradition, named John Joseph Maria. Instead, he insisted on the Hebrew form rather than the more common Mary. The etymology of this name, like much else, as the linguist in Esther will tell you, is contested. But I give you two of the suggested interpretations of the name Miriam, both of which are possibly relevant for Esther. The first is mistress of the seas. And indeed, Esther has traveled far and wide and explored to different degrees the Pacific, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The other suggested meaning of Miriam is mutiny or rebellion. The etymology of the name Esther is also contested. But one view is that it's derived from the word, which means, a root word, which means star or bright star. This is the meaning her father took in naming her. The alternatives he considered were Estella and the Spanish Estrella. But all of these stellar references were by way of a compromise, as my father really wished to name her Sputnik. But was no doubt restrained by our mother. Esther was born shortly after the launch of Sputnik 1 by the Soviets, and this created enormous excitement, marking the beginning of the space race. Esther is the seventh and last child in a family where the birth order was 2 girls, followed by 4 boys, then Esther. The gender dynamics of this birth order are fascinating, and Esther became very conscious of gender. She fought for her position and evaded the dependent last child syndrome. It is said that last children often learn how to make alliances, and despite her protestations whenever I comment on it, Esther has a formidable network. Not many persons could have put together that team who commented on the back of her book, when you get to see it. Her first home was here on campus, at what was then called number 1 Gibraltar Camp Road, now Gibraltar Camp Way. A large wooden house next to the Irving Hall Gate, which now houses the UWI Endowment and Development Fund. It had a large garden which was tended with great care by my mother, as she did wherever she lived. So that in the years that Esther lived or visited her mother, whether in Jamaica, the United States, Puerto Rico, England, or Nigeria, she always met a carefully tended garden and a deep appreciation of nature. Growing up on the campus was special in terms of the adults with whom we were interacting. And given our father's literary bent, Esther would have seen the likes of Sam Selvon, Derek Walcott, John Hearn, and/or George Lamming having a drink or two and arguing on the veranda, or in the latter case, George, spending long times living with the family. Pamela Mordecai, Eddie Baugh, and the dramatists Noel Vaz, Sheila Carter, and my mother's cousin, Hugh Morrison, were in regular contact. And representing all of these, I'm very happy to see that we have today with us Mervyn Morris and Helen, who were kinds of folks who let us know what literature was. Both our parents were scholars of the classics, appreciating the Greek poem from Lesbos, Sappho, evening brings together what the bright dawn scatters, and the Latin poet Horace, I have built a monument more lasting than bronze. They were both poets, although my mother's only published poems were published by Esther in the volume of Caribbean Quarterly, which she edited in honor of my father. The volume is called At Home the Green Remains, which is also the title of what is perhaps his best known poem, reflecting in part on the nostalgia of the migrant. Like our parents, Esther has lived much of her life abroad. She left Jamaica early in the 1970s when her father went to work in Puerto Rico. She started college in Florida and completed her degree in history at George Washington University in DC. She then moved to the University of Hawaii to complete her MA in East Asian Languages and Literature, majoring in Chinese. She then returned to DC to complete her PhD in linguistics at Georgetown University. She then returned to Hawaii, where she established herself as the independent filmmaker of which you have heard before. Like many, she believed, perhaps, while she was living in Hawaii, that at home the green remains. And I think that it was a bit of the shock of returning why she wrote this book. I'll tell you two other stories. One, there was a very conscious, caring little girl who one day brought home an almond tree to plant at home. This was over 50 years ago, and she's here today, my sister Katie. And at our home, and we always loved this almond tree. And later in life, very recent in fact, I said I must get a plaque put on that almond tree. Not to remember Katie as such, because such vanities escape her, but let people know that they are those caring little girls who love nature, who would come home and plant an almond tree, which was more than 50 years old at the time, or approximately. So when I went to the UWI Endowment and Development Center to make this offer, Esther will tell you what had happened. They had cut down the almond tree. And this is what we see on the campus, this is what we see in Jamaica, and this is what has led to Limbo. The other thing is my last story about my parents. My parents had an interesting courtship. And my eldest sister, Anna, who is not here, who always gets the stories and apologizes, she'd much rather be here than feeling the cold in Toronto. My brother, who is also a world traveler like Esther, is in Geneva and cannot be here. I believe it's Geneva, and apologizes as well. My parents went on a weekend, one of these house, I don't know what you call it in those days. And these two young girls saw this young couple going off into the bush, carrying some books with them, no doubt Horace and the like. And they thought this was very exciting because they were going to go and watch them in the bushes doing whatever young people do in the bushes. So they hid themselves carefully after a while they turned to each other in complete amazement and said, "They're reading them." I hope you read.
Mark, thanks very much for that warm introduction. Esther, thanks for giving me the pleasure of introducing this book. Proverbial wisdom warns that one should not judge a book by its cover. In the case of Esther's satirical novel Limbo, the reader is well advised to look beyond the familiar image of a heterosexual couple frozen in a tableau that evokes sun, sand, sea, and sex, the staples of the tourist industry in the generic islands. Though there is no visible limbo stick, it hangs above the scene. The woman's posture suggests the limberness of an accomplished dancer, and her bare thigh promises supple pleasures down under. But the limbo that is the prevailing symbol in Esther's novel is not primarily the touristic dance that allows happy natives to display their remarkable athleticism for the entertainment of strangers. Esther's undercover exploitation of the popular meaning of limbo as dance is a cunning act of bait and switch. For the epigraphs that frame her portrait of Jamaica reveal another level of discourse, the rarefied air of high culture. Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy and Kamau Brathwaite's poem Limbo. And I just want to read them quickly. Dante first. We're lost, but only so punished that without hope we live on in desire. That's the state of limbo. That's from Dante Alighieri, the Divine Comedy. And Kamau Brathwaite, his poem Limbo. And limbo stick is the silence in front of me. Limbo, limbo like me. Limbo, limbo like me. Knees spread wide and the water is hiding. Limbo, limbo like me. Knees spread wide and the dark ground is under me. Sun coming up and the drummers are praising me. Out of the dark and the dumb gods are raising me. This surprising juxtaposition of the literary and the popular, the divine and the carnal, the word and the dance, is the very essence of satire. According to Professor Wikipedia, quote, the word satire comes from the Latin satur and the subsequent phrase lanx satura. Satur meant full, but the juxtaposition with lanx, meaning dish, shifted the meaning to miscellany or medley. The expression lanx satura literally means a full dish of various kinds of fruits. What Esther dishes up in Limbo is a delicious mix of laughter and vexation. As she says in her disclaimer, quote, this is a satire. It is meant to make you laugh lest you weep, unquote. Esther puts on the table an array of troubling social issues that require our urgent attention. For example, environmental degradation, exploitative tourist policies, our continued dependence on foreign aid, and our corrupt justice system that allows certain people to get away with murder. But there's lots of hope in the novel as well. Flora Smith, the central character, muses on the paradoxes of hope. Flora is sitting in Hope Gardens. Hope, such a strange name for a slave plantation. But maybe it was the owner who had high hopes. John Tharp, who owned over 3,000 enslaved Africans and 10,000 acres, named his plantation Good Hope. He became the richest man in Jamaica, so surely his wishes were granted. But all over Jamaica are places with the name Hope, New Hope, Old Hope, Hope Bay, Hope Well, Good Hope. We are a hopeful people. And in a novel that focuses on the elements, air, earth, and water, It's not surprising that in addition to hope, that there's that fiery sexual element that is there too. Heterosexual, homosexual, male and female, threesomes, foursomes, multiple sons, polygamous households. I'm not going to spoil the fun by reading any of the hot stuff. Just a hint in Flora's post-coital reflection on the rigors of sex of the limbo dance variety with her supple lover, 20 years her junior. And I find it interesting that we talk about toy boys, but we don't talk about toy girls. It's okay for old men to have young girls, but not the other way around. So Flora, she touches her body. She's aching in all sorts of strange places. Flora decides if she's to continue this gymnastic sex life, she needs to take up yoga. That and maybe marathon running and sleeping 12 hours a day. Clearly, she must retire. She cannot continue to run an environmental organization and have a sex life. It's one or the other. One of my favorite passages in the novel beautifully illustrates Esther's satirical voice. Flora is on a talk show, Mark My Words, with host Mark Mackenzie, who sounds a lot like Monty Perkins. Incidentally, in her disclaimer, Esther makes a conventional declaration, quote, all characters are fictitious and the invention of the author. None is identical with any person living or dead, unquote. But especially since the book is dedicated to both John Maxwell and Diana Macaulay, readers can be forgiven for seeing similarities between John and the fictional Milton Lion Brown and the quote-unquote pretty browning Flora, who looks a lot like Diana. So here's one of my favorite ways to see Esther in full flight. Another top of the hour news break, and they're into the third hour. Flora had told Mark she wanted to keep the environmental topics all public health issues, the things Jamaicans might care about: garbage, sewage, burning rubbish, air pollution. She told him to stay away from things Jamaicans don't like: wild animals, too many trees, untidiness, the disgrace of dinginess and disorder. But he insisted he wants to include biodiversity, and so has Dave Roper, a government biologist, speak on conserving Jamaican biological diversity, including talk of endemic and endangered species, crocodiles, sea turtles, snakes, bats, lizards, butterflies, all sorts of creatures Jamaicans couldn't care less about or are hostile toward. There is talk of conserving habitat, of the dangers of deforestation, soil erosion, loss of habitation. Flora is glad for the break from having to talk, but knows this tack is only going to lead to backlash. And so she isn't in the least surprised by the listener who calls the second the biodiversity enthusiast stop speaking. It's Mackenzie. I always listen to your show and appreciate all you're trying to do. But these people you have on, what they call themselves? Ain't by something mental or the other? Sure. Them is just rich white people who don't want black people to have what them have. Them just a fight against black people progress. Them say don't cut down the tree. So all them big houses get built. Them say don't pollute the air. But what them big fancy Prada use for drive? Them say keep all the bush because crocodile and lizard and snake must live. But how we humans supposed to live? It's only because it's primitive they want to keep us. They want to keep us like in the time of the Arawak them, when people walk around naked and chew and leaf and chase after food with bow, arrow and spear. But it can't work so. If you read the Bible, you know that God put man to have dominion over all things at this earth. Everything is for we use, so we must use it. Dig out the mountain, mine the backside, cut the tree, then mine the river, rock and sand. Whatever it takes, we must have development, must have job. We don't need all them tree around the place, just nasty the place. We need more road, we need more car, we need more house, we need whole heap more job, we need modernize, we need develop. That's what we need in Jamaica. We don't want no more Philippine boardhouse with no light, no running water, with bullfrog and penny wallet and all kind of ignorance. He they think that Mr. Mackenzie, pure foolishness these people are chat. Even Flora has to concede the persuasiveness of the caller's argument. This is a paradox of development. They have been shaking their heads and covering their faces in dismay through the last caller's rant. But after the fact, it seems virtuoso, a masterful analysis, really. Now, my only regret after finished reading the book, as I told Esther, was it done already? I was so upset. There were a few more pages which I thought was more novel. And much to my horror, I discovered it was a glossary of Jamaican words and usage and a linguistic statement about the Jamaican language. And even though I quite enjoy playing amateur linguist, I was very vexed. And I completely understood Olive Senior's blurb, with which I end. In Limbo, Esther Figueroa deftly navigates between steamy romance, backdoor deals, and dangerous plunges into the inferno of Jamaica's environmental disasters. But the novel's other side is its tender and evocative celebration of love, friendship, place, and belonging. Limbo is a page-turner that will make you want to start all over again when you come to the end. In Esther Figueroa's skillful hands, the tropical paradise is in limbo, but not yet lost. It should evoke in every reader a passionate desire to redeem what is left clinging to the exposed roots. Thank you.